This program outlines maintenance procedures for the Arrow 1.5-inch EXP metallic diaphragm pump, model number PD15X-X. When repairing an Arrow 1.5-inch EXP diaphragm pump, always use genuine Arrow service kits. To repair the air section of the pump, use kit number 637389. To repair the fluid section of the pump, use kit number 637375-X. Tools needed to repair this pump include a 10 mm wrench or socket, a 13 mm wrench or socket, 15 mm wrench or socket, a 7/8" wrench or socket, a 5 mm Allen wrench, a small flathead screwdriver, an O-ring pick, a torque wrench measuring inch-pounds, a torque wrench measuring foot-pounds. An impact wrench can ease the teardown process. Prior to repairing the pump, make sure it has been flushed. Review the material safety data sheet for the fluid in the pump to determine what safety equipment or apparel may be needed when repairing the unit. Use a 15 mm socket to remove the 4 screws that hold the outlet manifold in place. Lift the manifold, then remove the ball checks and seats. Be careful not to damage the sealing point of the seat. Use the 15 mm socket to remove the lower inlet manifold. Pull the seats and ball checks from the fluid caps. Be careful not to damage the sealing point of the seat. Use the 13 mm socket to remove hex flange nuts and bolts that secure the fluid caps. Separate the fluid caps from the center body. This will expose the diaphragms. Use the 7/8" socket to loosen the screw and washer that secure the diaphragm. You can now remove the diaphragm washer, the diaphragm, and the backup washer. Models with Teflon diaphragms will have a backup diaphragm. Pull the remaining diaphragm and connecting rod from the center body. Use the wrench flats on the connecting rod to assist in removing the remaining diaphragm. Use an 8 mm Allen wrench to loosen the bolts and nuts that hold the air caps to the center body. Also remove the copper gaskets. If the air caps have not already fallen free, separate one from the center body. Remove the track gasket and O-ring. Also remove the connecting rod bushing. Pull the U-cup from the air cap. Lift the second cap to remove the remaining track gasket, O-ring, and U-cup. This completes disassembly of the fluid section. Use a 5 mm Allen wrench to remove the air valve block from the center body. Now remove the track gaskets and quick dump checks from the center body. The adapter plate is spring-loaded in the valve block. Use the flat blade screwdriver to carefully remove the adapter plate. Then remove the track gasket, valve plate, and valve insert. Use the 5 mm Allen wrench to remove screws that secure the end cap and gasket to the valve block. Pull the end cap from the valve block. Remove the gasket. Gently tap the valve block to remove the spool. Now use the pick to remove the U-cups from both ends of the spool. If your pump model has the non-metallic center body, use the 10 millimeter wrench to loosen the nuts and screws that secure the valve block. Remove the screws and both end plates. Pull the end cap from the valve block. Remove the gasket. Gently tap the valve block on the workbench to dislodge the spool. Remove the U-cups from each end of the spool. Stand the center body upright. With the motor facing you, gently tap the right actuator pin to remove the opposing actuator pin assembly and pilot piston. Use a socket extension to push out the remaining actuator pin assembly. Push the actuator pin from the sleeve. Then remove both O-rings from the sleeve. Repeat the process for the remaining actuator pin assembly. Use a socket extension to push out the pilot sleeve. Remove the O-rings from the outer diameter of the sleeve. Also remove the remaining O-ring from the center body. This completes disassembly of the pump. Clean all components prior to reassembly. Use Aero service kits when repairing the pump. Apply lubriplate FML2 grease to the O-rings and U-cups prior to reassembly. A packet of grease is supplied in both service kits. Install new U-cups on the spool. Make sure the lips of both U-cups face toward the center of the spool. Lubricate the spool assembly and the internal diameter of the valve block. Slide the large end of the spool into the valve block, being careful not to damage the U-cups. Place a new gasket on the end cap. Secure the end cap with the 4 screws. Use the 5 millimeter Allen wrench to torque the screws to 40 to 50 inch-pounds or 4.5 to 5.6 Newton meters. If your pump model has the non-metallic center body, place a new gasket on the end cap. Secure the end cap to the valve block using the end plate, screws, and nuts. Use a 10 millimeter wrench to tighten the nuts. Torque to 35 to 40 inch-pounds or 4 to 4.5 Newton meters. Lubricate the ceramic valve insert and install it into the valve block. Make sure the concave of the insert faces out. The radius of the concave should be parallel to the spool. Now lubricate and install the ceramic valve plate over the insert. Make sure the plate lies flat. The polished side should face the insert. Place a new gasket onto the adapter plate. Position the adapter plate over the valve block. Make sure the opened end of the track gasket seat faces down. Then snap it into place. Lubricate and install new quick dump checks into the center body. Install the 2 track gaskets. Then attach the valve block to the center body, using the 4 screws and a 5 millimeter Allen wrench. Torque to 35 to 40 inch-pounds or 4 to 4.5 Newton meters. Place a new lubricated O-ring onto the center body. Install a new O-ring on the outer diameter of the pilot sleeve. Insert the sleeve into the center body. Be careful not to cut one of the O-rings during this step. Lubricate the new pilot piston and insert it into the sleeve. Insert the pilot actuator pin into a sleeve. Install new O-rings on the actuator pin and sleeve. Insert into the center body. Place both of the air caps face down on the workbench. Install new U-cups into the air caps, making sure the lips of the U-cup face down. Install a new track gasket and O-ring on one side of the center body. Using lubricant helps keep these parts in place. Set the center body onto the corresponding air cap, making sure the O-ring and track gasket remain in place. Put the next track gasket and O-ring in place on the center body. Install the connecting rod bushing and carefully place the second air cap onto the center body. Place new copper gaskets onto the bolts. Apply Loctite 242 to the bolt threads and insert them through the pump center body. Carefully tilt the pump and place a nut under the corresponding bolt. Using the 8mm Allen wrench, tighten the bolts enough to hold the air caps to the center body. Stand the center body upright. Place new copper gaskets onto the remaining bolts. Apply Loctite 242 to the bolt threads and insert them through the center body. Attach the corresponding nuts to the bolts. Torque the bolts to 12 to 17 foot-pounds or 16.3 to 23 Newton-meters. Build the diaphragm assembly by placing the small washer, the diaphragm washer, the diaphragm, and the backup washer onto the screw. Note that pumps with Teflon diaphragms feature a second backup diaphragm. Apply Loctite 271 to the screw threads and attach the connecting rod to this assembly. Lubricate the connecting rod before inserting it into the center body. Be careful not to damage the U-cup in this process. Apply Loctite 271 to the second diaphragm assembly and attach to the connecting rod. To keep Teflon diaphragms in place, it helps to insert a pair of bolts through the air cap and diaphragm. Now use the 7/8" socket to torque the diaphragm washers to 50 to 55 foot-pounds or 67.8 to 74.6 Newton-meters. Apply anti-seize compound to the bolt threads. Attach the fluid caps to the center body using the bolts and the hex flange nuts. With the 1/2" socket, torque each to 15 to 20 foot-pounds or 20.3 to 27.1 Newton-meters. Follow the torque sequence in the operator's manual when attaching the caps. Place the ball checks and seats in the fluid caps. Attach the lower inlet manifold. Apply anti-seize compound to the screws. Then use the 15mm socket to torque these screws to 20 to 25 foot-pounds or 27.1 to 33.9 Newton-meters. Place the seats and new ball checks onto the fluid caps. Carefully align the top outlet manifold and secure with the screws. Apply anti-seize compound to the screws, then use the 15 millimeter socket to torque these screws to 20 to 25 foot-pounds or 27.1 to 33.9 Newton meters. This completes disassembly and reassembly procedures for the Ingersoll Rand Aero 1.5-inch EXP metallic diaphragm pump.